Hey everyone, it's been a while, but welcome back to the Caregiving and Entrepreneurship Reimagined podcast. I am your host, Melissa Miller, and I am so excited about today's guest, y'all, because I have such a good one because she is an author, she is a speaker, she has a background in psychology, but she's also been a caregiver, and she has so much passion for the caregiving industry and just helping people who are navigating that for the first time. And so I just was so excited when Christy said yes to being a guest on the podcast because she has so much to bring to the table. And y'all, here's the kicker too. There's no way we can get everything that we want to talk about in one episode. So make sure if you're new to the podcast that you like, follow, and subscribe, and share this with your friends so that way they can catch up on episode on part one, because next week we're going to be doing another episode as well. So this one we're going to be talking a bit about working while being a caregiver and how kind of tricky that can be. And then next week we will be talking about caring on the go and about how just kind of have about how you need to be prepared with certain supplies, tools, resources, etc. Because caregiving doesn't happen just in the home. We're still living life, right? So we still, besides the medical appointments and everything that goes with being a caregiver, we're still working. We're still going to family events. We're still going to things, activities that our kids are doing. We're still running errands, going to the bank, going to the grocery store, going to the dry cleaners, whatever the case may be. But caregiving doesn't stop. And so between these two episodes, my hope and prayer is that you walk away with some new skills, some new ideas, and just feel less alone in your caregiving journey because it can happen to anybody at any time. So, Christy, thank you for being on the podcast today.
Oh, I'm delighted, Melissa. We had such a great conversation the other day, and I'm so excited to be with you because I love what you're doing. So this is perfect.
Oh, thank you. Well, and I love what you're doing too, because there's so much about being a caregiver in terms of skills that you have to take in. But then what I loved about our conversation that you and I talked about, which probably could even be for another episode in of itself, about dealing with the healthcare system. We live in the States, and obviously I know I would take into account healthcare is different and depending on where you live. But either way, one thing I hope that you guys learn to do, one other skill that you need to do is to learn what assets, resources you are allowed with where you're at and how to maybe get creative with leveraging other resources if you don't have X, Y, and Z, whether that's online, from a website or a coach or mentor like Christy or myself or anything. It's important that you just pull out all the stops and educate yourself as best as you can with what resources and tools that you have. But we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit here. So Christy, for those of my audience that aren't acquainted with your work, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So first and foremost, I was a caregiver. I don't know that, and I'm going to say something here that I'm going to backtrack on too, but right now I'm not, because this is what caregivers do, right? We minimize what we do. But I am not currently a caregiver per se, but my in-laws are older and my husband is, we're the long distance ones, but that doesn't mean we're not, phoning in and supporting and being there. So caregiving takes on a lot of different, it looks different in a lot of different ways, but if I sort of believe that if it's taking up space in your head and it's impacting you in some way, then hey, you know what, you're in that group. But I was a caregiver for my parents. I managed their care. They both died about 7 weeks apart in 2015. At the same time, I was working full time as a school psychologist, and I had two children at home with my husband, a tween and a teen. So it was kind of all the things. So that was my introduction to that. However, as a school psychologist, I worked a lot always with people with special needs, and so I had this background already in case management and kind of learning how to navigate and read assessments, do assessments, put things together. And I had to lean into that. But I also feel like you don't have to go back to school to be a caregiver. You pull from what you know. And so there's so many things. That's what I love about your podcast is you're talking to people who are caregiving, but then also, working as entrepreneurs because there's so many skills that we have that we can pivot to use in our caregiving. And so that's what I think is really important. A little bit about me. As I said, I was a school psychologist for about 20 years. Prior to that, I I already had a master's in counseling psychology, so it worked in mental health oriented fields for a while. And what I'm doing now, so I retired in 2021, finished my book, and it's called Building a Legacy of Love, Thriving in the Sandwich Generation. And my goal, my mission was really to raise conversations about the sandwich generation. And when I started using, listen, it's not my term. It came from 1980, and I give credit to the person who coined that term in my book. Dorothy Miller was a social worker in the 80s. But I wanted to raise this conversation because I wasn't hearing that term. And in fact, when I was in it, I didn't know what it was called. I just knew I was doing something that was really hard. And it really was tough. And people started asking me more about it. And I thought, you know what? We just need to keep raising this conversation. Since 2021, I'm hearing that term a lot more, and people are talking about it, and people are recognizing it as a thing. We're also recognizing that caregiving is taking a huge toll on people. And so we're hearing about it more. And I couldn't be happier because you can't change something till you recognize it's out there and it's something to pay attention to. So that's been my mission, and I've done that through writing. I'm also part of a group called Al's Authors, and they are a group of authors who have written about dementia journeys. And we promote those authors, and then we also do a podcast with that. So both my parents did have dementia. My mother had Alzheimer's, and my father had vascular dementia. So
Mm.
that's kind of where I'm at. That's who I am.
Yeah. Well, and I think what's interesting, I love that you touched on the point of there's a lot more sandwich generation caregiving because it is. I actually just saw something recently where it said like the number of aging people is a lot higher than the number because people aren't having as many children now because it's
Right.
expensive and which is understandable, but that's going to impact, the caregiving. And
Yeah.
I come from it. I was in healthcare for 15 years as a certified nursing assistant. And so I dealt with elderly and dementia patients. That was my job and I loved it. But there is a need for other resources because not everyone has a desire to spend their last twilight years in a nursing facility. And so, if that's the case, that was the case with both my grandmother, my father, and my mother. They all died in their home. Praise the Lord. But I know that's not realistic for every family member of being able to honor that wish, although they want to. But I want to make that the goal where they have the choice. I
Yeah.
know there's some situations, though, where, especially with dementia, it gets to the point where it is a lot safer and better for the family mentally and emotionally and physically if they're not having that added stress and pressure on them by having them in a secure facility where there is staff 24/7 to attend to their needs and that they're locked in so they don't wander out into the street and something else catastrophic happens to them. Every situation's different,
Oh,
but
absolutely.
overall, I think it's so important, and that's why I really want to have you on the podcast, that this conversation is just getting started, and it's only going to accelerate, I guarantee you, in the next 20 to 30 years. And so
Yes.
one thing I want to do with the podcast and my business that I'm passionate about is teaching people how to be a caregiver without spending $2,000 to be trained minimized, right? Or spending 3,000 or spending 3 months of their lives minimum to at least get a certification as a certified nursing assistant. I can teach you how to do that without being certified. I can't teach you how to be med certified, but I can teach you some of the basic skills of what you
Sure.
need to do. In terms of progress notes, progress notes is basically just documenting what you're seeing. Are they have they gone from, like with their gait and mobility as an example, have they gone from yesterday they could walk fine, but now today they're staggering, their pace isn't as quick, they feel dizzy. That's the information you would be writing down and sending to their medical provider so they can
Right.
go, okay, is something going on here? Are we
Right.
talking like, is it just a medication that we need to tweak, or is this the onset symptom of something bigger?
Right.
So those are skills you can learn without having to go to school.
Exactly.
Yeah, and
Exactly.
the more information we get out there about this, I think the better it's going to be for everybody because again, not everyone's going to want to leverage the medical system in terms of where they stay long term in a facility because it is expensive. But I want to let other people know that there is another option. And sandwich generation a little bit too, it can be different. So like for my situation, I was a sandwich caregiver for a while. I started out with just caring for my husband when
Mhm.
he was diagnosed with epilepsy, and then at the time when he started getting sick, our daughter had was just about to turn 1.
Yeah.
And then fast forward 2 years. or no, 3 years, excuse me, fast forward 3 years, my mother declined in health and passed
Mm,
away. And so then we
mhm.
moved in with my father to take care of him. And we didn't know how long that would be. Either way, we were here for the long haul.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but we didn't know how long he was going to be with us, but he lasted 2 years. And so I
Mhm,
was at one point I had a 3 to 4 year old for those 2 years, 5 year old. And then I had my husband who was,
mhm.
dealing with this epilepsy. And then my husband, or excuse me, my father, excuse me, had a whole host of medical issues. He had like 3 different health issues. And so yeah, I was going everywhere
Yes.
with dealing with different diagnoses, different sets of doctors, keeping up with my toddler. It was insane.
Mhm,
But the
mhm.
biggest thing that helped me with that season was just having systems. A system for
Yes.
tracking medications, a system for documenting progress notes, say having a tab in my phone where all the doctors were in one shot and I could just go scroll through and find the number I need whenever I need to call and set up a number. It's simple systems like that that I want to get you guys thinking about, that it doesn't have to be rocket science where you go back to get a medical degree or anything
Yeah,
like that.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
yes, yes, Christy and I have professional experience, but that has saved our hide for our season. And we want to definitely leverage, once you agree, Christy, that we want to leverage our experience
Oh,
and help
yeah.
others do the same without having to necessarily walk through those hoops.
Oh, absolutely. And you bring up a really good point. And sandwich generation, back when this social worker coined the term, she really was working with people who were raising kids and now caring for their aging parent. So she saw that as the sandwich. But you know what? At a delicatessen, there are a million kinds of sandwiches, aren't there?
Oh, yes,
There
quite
are
a
club
few.
sandwiches, there are paninis, there are open face sandwiches, and it's so funny because I hear the more I talk to people, they're like, "Well, I'm not really sandwich generation," and they tell me what's going on. I'm like, "Yeah, you're squeezed. That's sandwich." And so maybe you don't have children, but you have a thriving business that you're trying to keep on board, and now you're feeling yourself being derailed by caregiving duties. Hey, you're squeezed. That's the squeeze. So maybe that's an open face sandwich. I don't know. It sounds
Right.
to me like you were a double decker. You've got a spouse and then a parent and children. So I mean, it's a lot. So however you define your sandwich, my feeling is I'm very inclusive. My feeling is if you feel squeezed, hey, call yourself a sandwich. You can call it anything you want because, like I said, at the delicatessen you can find everything. So
Yeah,
it's just it's caregiving, but it's that other the piece of it is you've got something else, and we all do, right? I mean,
absolutely.
but it's
Absolutely.
just feeling that squeeze. And I think when my particular expertise is talking about when you have children in the mix, because as a
Hmm.
school psychologist, I bring in this child development piece and what is the impact on you as a parent? How are you
Hmm.
now showing up as a parent to your children when you're also experiencing grief and sadness and concern with an aging person or an ailing spouse or whoever you might be caring for, right? You're throwing a whole nother element of emotions into this mix. And so it's hard to show up joyfully sometimes for your kids. And so
Hmm.
that does have an impact on your child. We don't have to see that as bad though. We can look at it and come to an awareness and think about, and I love your word systems. We can think of systems and strategies to help us move from one place to another because we are toggling between generations. And that's kind of that's my sweet spot is talking about that particular element of caregiving is when you have children in the mix. So,
Absolutely. And systems can be everything. I mean, I have systems for how I manage our budget and keep track of things and file things in my office for like our
yeah.
bills, but then I have systems for how I save and document my content and plan my content and like the interviews and things I do for the podcast and my blog. So systems are can be a lifesaver. And if you the more and actually I want you to think about systems, guys, as a tool and a resource and kind of a backup. Think of it as your backup plan. When you don't have to think, when you don't have much bandwidth, because when you're a caregiver, you're again, like Christy said, you have the concern for your kids. If you're a mom like I am, or like we have been, and if it doesn't matter the age, I had a toddler when a baby slash toddler when I started my journey. She had teenagers, so it doesn't matter. But your kids, and then you're toggling whatever illness they have, and what if they have multiple? My husband has always had just one. Two, he has two, well, two, I guess, because he has two types of seizures, but still, but dealing with seizures. And then my father had a whole enchilada with three or four different health issues.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so you don't have, when it gets to be that crazy, and I'm trying to work and build a business. So, your bandwidth really goes down the drain really fast once you
Yeah.
start adding layer after layer after layer, excuse me. But if you have a system for how you handle the day-to-day stuff, organize it, where to find your loved one's medications, pre written medical history, list of medications, current doctors, allergies, triggers of
Mm-hmm.
the illness
Mm-hmm.
written down before, that sets you up really fast for when you
Right.
have to go to the medical appointment, or God forbid, call 911 and you're having
Yeah.
to have them transported to the hospital because there
Mm-hmm.
is some sort of emergency that is without which that is with that is not within the normal baseline of their health. So
Right.
the more you can simplify your life by having things pre-organized, it's going to save you so much time. Now, I know there's going to be a lot of people that go, but Melissa, I don't know where to start, and
Yeah.
I don't have time to learn anything else or learn a new software because I know we're in the digital age. Digital's nice, but if you're just getting started and you honestly don't have the bandwidth to learn a software, I don't want you to learn a software. I want you to just use a good Word document that you do use on a daily basis on your computer or on your phone, or guess what? Use a notebook. I've used a
Yeah.
notebook the whole time with my husband,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that works just to write stuff down. Now, could I do it? Is it getting to the point where probably it might be better to transition to a digital resource? Probably, but for now, I have something. At least I have something written down that I can reference when we're at medical appointments, when I'm calling the doctor
Yeah.
and I'm having to say, "Hey, this happened on this day. This is what I'm seeing." It's written down. I'm not having to try to rack my brain for what I'm trying to remember. So systems are what simplify your
Yeah.
caregiving journey. And it also helps you with your bandwidth, because here's the thing: whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're a caregiver, whether you're a parent, I don't want you to sacrifice your well-being to do it.
Yeah.
Okay? You've chosen to be a caregiver. You've chosen to be a parent. You've chosen to be a spouse. You've chosen to build a business. Those are all important roles. But that doesn't mean that you need to sacrifice your sleep, your health, your nutrition, your hydration, even just things, your passions and hobbies that light you up. You don't need to sacrifice that. And so then that's where the systems come in of like, even just blocking out time in your calendar. Like, okay, every day at 6 o'clock, I'm going to get up and I'm going to spend 30 minutes journaling or do my devotional or read a chapter in a book or read, or something. Or
Yeah.
maybe it's like, okay, I'm working on my wellness. I'm going to just create a little habit tracker in Airtable or on my phone and just mark it off that I've done that, or set a daily reminder to drink water and
Yeah.
several times throughout the day on my calendar. So that way I will be alerted by my phone to make sure I'm refilling my water bottle throughout the day and drinking water.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's so many different things you can do. The
Yeah.
idea here is I don't want you to get so lost in all the ways you can do it
Right.
instead of just start.
And you
Please
have to,
just start.
yeah, and you have to, systems work.
Yes.
Sometimes, here's what's happened. Everything is kind of running on a system. If your system's not working, it may not be like you just throw that one out. You kind of have to examine, okay, where in the system is it not working for me? Like for instance, like you talked about digital and paper, it's like, learning, I agree with you. If you don't have time or bandwidth to learn a new software program and you're a note taker, but carry a notebook with you, right? And so maybe you don't
Hmm.
need a great big notebook. Get a little one that fits in your purse or your backpack or something, or your back pocket,
Hmm.
whatever it might be. But you figure out what works for you, because
Hmm.
yeah, you don't need to give yourself another thing to do. I do feel like the one thing we always have with us in this day and age is our phone, right? But you can take notes on your
On your phone.
phone. You can
Yes.
record notes on your phone. You can find different things, and there are some software programs that are really great for caregivers. And I know that learning them might be daunting, so you don't have to jump into it. Use it for what it does already have, and you can.
Hmm.
I mean, honestly, nothing happens if I don't put it on my calendar in my phone. I don't carry a paper calendar with me anymore.
Yep.
So it's got to be in my phone, and I put reminders in my phone. It could be things like, check meds or check this or whatever it might be. I'm putting that in my phone because that's just kind of a fail safe for me. Because I know
Yeah.
I'm going to have it with me. And so
Absolutely.
there are lots of different things. So I think it's important to definitely look at what are your systems because they're there whether you're aware of them or not. But, look at where they're working when they're not working and then
Hmm.
tweak what does work for you.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you know that, oh, I'm never going to, this is going to be hard for me. Yeah, don't freak yourself out. Find out what you're currently doing and what do you need to do, maybe enhance that. It would be my,
Hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah.
So I love it that you talk about systems because I
Yeah.
feel like they really, really work and different strategies.
It's the brain. I mean, I think it's just
Yeah.
my professional brain. I mean,
Yeah.
and literally, well, backstory. When I was in healthcare as a CNA, we would have a roster sheet, and we would call that our brain. So it had whatever unit I was on, whatever section of that unit I was assigned. It had I would write at the top like the other aides that were my coworkers for that day, what nurse I was working under, and then as I was getting reported at the beginning of my shift by each room number because we did walking rounds. That's where we walk room by room. We talk about what's been going on with that patient in the last 24 to 48 hours, because we get details too from not only the previous shift, but lots of times the previous shift before them said, oh, hey, this happened on that shift. And then I didn't see any further decline with this issue, but still we're still waiting we've decided we want to watch it specifically for 24 hours to make sure there's no further complications. So, I would be making notes by my roster sheet when I was getting report, and then throughout the day, I was making notes because that also too would be what turns into what I chart in my charts when I did my paperwork charting, and then it also became my handy dandy tool for when I gave report because guess what? A lot happens when you have 15 to 30 patients. There's a lot that happens in an 8-hour shift. That's a good amount of time. So
Yeah.
having my brain with me was
Yeah.
what really helped me with being really detailed and giving accurate information. Because here's the thing, as a caregiver, you are the eyes and ears of your loved one's medical professionals. As an aide, I was the one that out of the nurses, the doctors, the physical therapists, dietitians, occupational therapists, I was the one that spent the most time with the patients. And I was the one that would be the first one usually to go like, okay, Mr. Jones could stand up and pivot from his bed to his wheelchair yesterday. He's dizzy and can't even stand. And then by me saying, hey, I see a red light,
Yeah.
that is what triggers the nurse to go, okay, I'm putting a call into the doctor, or okay, I'm going to call OT or PT and have them come evaluate them
Right.
today, and I'm going to meanwhile I'm going to look at their meds, see if they're if we started a new medication, and if this is maybe a side effect of that, so we could tread carefully and make the right
Yes.
kinds of choices. So when you're thinking about your systems, I want you to go easy peasy lemon squeezy. So going back to the idea of the phone, write
Yeah.
reminders. You can write notes. You can do. I live by Google Calendar. It's my favorite thing
Yeah.
in the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can color code. You can
Mm-hmm.
have personal. I personally have been getting into having a personal task list and then a business task list. So I
Yeah.
see everything in one spot. I'm not jumping in and out of softwares. And then also too, like if there's been times where my husband has had something happen at home, or not, excuse me, not at home, but on the go.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously I do keep paper and pen with me a lot of the time, but sometimes
Mm-hmm.
it's faster. Like I have my phone, I just type something and
Yep.
then that way, and then I transfer it to the notebook when I get home. So
Yeah.
there's more than one way to do it. You can even just kind of tweak when you're out and about. Leverage the phone maybe while you're out and about, and then when you get home, put it in
Yeah.
your master copy,
Yeah.
whether it's in your master Google Doc on your computer because you can still access it on your phone, or you could do that in a notebook, a master notebook like what I have. Whatever you need to do, just start documenting and just start documenting
Yes.
what you're observing because that's the
Yeah.
first role of being a caregiver is observe and
Right.
document. Yeah.
And can I jump in here? I love that you called this thing in your office at your workplace the brain, and then our phone might be our brain, and our
Yes.
brains are amazing. So you're speaking my language about the brains. I love this. This is what we do as school psychologists. We look at a lot of things, and one area that we look at a lot of is called executive functioning, and those are the skills that we all have. Listen, our kids don't have, they are developing executive functioning skills. The prefrontal cortex doesn't even become fully formed until 24, 25, 26. So our young adults are still struggling with some of these things, but the things that are executive functionings are things like our working memory. Can we hold some information in short-term memory, but then use it? Our inhibitory control. Can we inhibit ourselves from maybe blurting out something we don't need to be blurting out, right? This is something we have to learn to. And as adults, if we're typically developing, we kind of learn that. Maybe sometimes we don't because no one's ever called us on it, right? Cognitive flexibility, that's being able to look at something differently. We get set in our ways and we have, well, I'll never do that. Maybe have a little cognitive flexibility. Like maybe there's, as I say, there are more right answers to most questions. There's more than one right answer. We think there's one right answer, but there's really multiple right answers. Um, can we organize our world? Can we organize our stuff? Can we initiate tasks, or do we just, perseverate on that? Do we plan? Do we self-monitor? And I want to talk about self-monitoring, time management, goal setting. These are all executive functions that we're using. But here's what happens when we're stressed out. And it's not just caregivers. But when you're stressed out, your brain kind of goes offline. Your executive functionings are diminished because you're stressed out. Your body is flooded by hormones like cortisol and which is a stress hormone, and adrenaline, because we kind of have this built-in system in our body with our stress response, which is beautiful. Stress sometimes gets a bad name. We wouldn't do a lot of things if we didn't feel the stress to do it, right? On the other hand, it's that we never pay attention to how much we're taking on and responding to stress, and we're not letting go of the stress. And
Right.
so when we're doing these observations of the people we're caring for or caring about in our job or whatever, we also have to make time to do a little self-reflection every day. How am I? How am I
Hmm.
doing? When you start to feel that overwhelmed feeling, and I'll tell you, the one that comes to me, I know I'm really stressed out and need to take a breath when I feel like my shoulders are up by my earlobes, right? Because I'm just like tense. This is where I hold it, right? And I'm like, okay, Christy, breathe. And I can, oh, you know, but I gotta let that go. I gotta pay attention to my body, pay attention to that pit in my stomach, and realize I might need to take a step back right now. you know, Ask for help. I might need to enlist some support because I'm overwhelmed. And we
Hmm.
don't make great decisions when we're really overwhelmed. Like I said, all of our executive functionings are just kind of diminished. So pay attention to yourself and all the people you care about. Take notes on yourself too. This stresses me out more than this. What are those things? And it's just not to judge yourself, not to criticize yourself. It's progress, not perfection. And so
Yes.
we just have to be gentle with ourselves and realize it's normal. I'd like to tell you that everything I did for my parents was fabulous and it was wonderful and it was made all the difference in the world. And I can't tell you that because you know what? I'm human. And I was in denial about my mother's Alzheimer's. I probably did this wrong. There were days when I was just like, I was just not a nice person, to my kids or my parents or what. I mean, but I'm human and I've had to learn to let go of that and also pay more attention to what I'm doing. What am I doing for myself? And sometimes our self-care is just letting ourselves off the hook, like
Hmm.
you're not bad. You're not a horrible person. You had a bad moment. Everyone has a bad moment. Where are you going to go next? First thing you're going to do is you're going to just nurture yourself a little bit. Just nurture yourself a little bit. Forgive yourself. Move on. You're human. Come on. You're showing up for big stuff. So, yeah, that's really important. So I think all of those things are important. So you stirred you stirred that thought in me when you're talking about the brain. And it's like we have to take care of our brain because our brain runs everything. But we
Hmm.
have to realize sometimes our brains go offline when we're really stressed out.
Yeah. Well, and that's why as much of, observe, with my framework, observe and,
Yeah.
observe and document, communicate, and then, prepare for emergencies, but then the last one is prioritize self-care. That's
Yeah.
so important. And that's the reason it's part of framework number 5, it's the fifth thing in my framework is
Yeah.
because it all starts with you. If
Yeah.
you don't take care of yourself, you're no good to your children. You're no good to
Right.
your spouse. You're no good to the loved one you're caring for, whether it is a spouse, aging parent, aging aunt, sister, brother, child. I don't care. You're no good to them. And then if you're an entrepreneur like we are, we're no good to
Mm-hmm.
our clients.
Right.
So and you're no good to yourself because y'all, we only get this one life. We really do. And I want you to have the best life. And just because you're a caregiver, it doesn't mean that your life has to stop and that you cannot go for passions and dreams and
Mhm.
hobbies that you don't
Mhm.
have. One thing I've been really focusing on the last 2 years is my wellness. So I've been working out. I'm taking supplements. I'm trying to work with on my nutrition and my portion control,
Yeah.
drinking 100 ounces of water a day. But that's me. But what
Yeah.
and getting back into knitting, I've been really having a lot of fun
Oh,
getting
neat.
back into knitting baby blankets for friends and family that are expecting, and trying out some new patterns. And I for my habit recently for my knitting, I actually just invested in, because I had to my phone broke, so I had to get a new one. And the app that I use to save my patterns and like keep track of where I'm at when I'm working on a project, it did not compete. It's not
Oh,
compatible with my phone. So I was
oh
like,
no.
shoot. So I had to invest in a new one. And so I treated myself, it was $40, but this one's so nice because I can import patterns from websites, and I
Mhm.
can also have multiple counters to keep track of like how many rows there actually is in a project, what row am I on, and also
Yeah.
to have it repeat. So, and so that makes it, again, it's a system for how I enjoy
Mhm.
my hobby.
Mhm.
And I put a little money in it. And I'm going to tell you right now, it's okay to put a little money on yourself for the long haul, because caregiving usually is more than 1 year. It's more
Ugh,
than,
yeah.
it's not 6 months to a year. It can be, it's definitely at least 6 months or more,
Yeah.
depending on what the situation is. If it's sudden terminal or if it's longevity chronic, like what I'm dealing with, like the situations I've had. I cared for my dad for 2 years. My mother was chronically ill from the time she was 20 till the time she passed away at 71. And
Wow.
then my husband, he's been sick for 5 years. So, and
Yeah.
I have
Yeah.
three chronic health issues of my own. So,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
just it's a marathon. Caregiving is such a marathon. And like a professional athlete, y'all, the only way you're going to survive is if you are conditioned and you keep
Yeah.
yourself conditioned. So whether that's 15 minutes breaks, I tell my clients 15-minute breaks. So whether that's
Mhm.
15 minutes to grab a snack, 15 minutes to maybe walk around your subdivision, maybe the cul-de-sac if you can't go too far, or even just stand outside and breathe, or lock yourself in the bathroom for 15 minutes. I don't care. Just 15 minutes for yourself. And
Yeah.
probably 15 minutes more than time one time throughout the day, because you're going to have those moments where you want to blow your stack and you're done.
Well,
So,
and yeah, and it's so true. And like I love the image of the pro athlete or any kind of, we get coaches or people to help us and we learn some new skill sets or we refine some things, but we invest in that because we want to be better. The other thing to remember is I think when kids are in the mix, and this is again, this is my sweet spot, is when you prioritize yourself, it's really easy to feel guilty like you're taking away from someone else. That's
mm,
the trap we get into. We're taking away from our kids, we're taking away from our parent, we're taking away from our spouse, we're taking away from our job. But the deal is, we are actually adding value to all those people when we take care of ourselves. And when we can make that mind shift to, this is how I am able to add value to my children when I take care of myself because I show up as a better parent. The other thing we're doing when we take care of ourselves with our kids, this is a big one for me, we are role modeling how to be giving ourselves self care. And this is where I think age appropriately we can have conversations with our kids, right? We can say, this is why mommy's taking a break right now. I know you wanted me to play this game with you, but mommy needs to go take a nap because this is what's happening for me right now, and I feel kind of yucky. Do you ever feel yucky? I feel yucky right now. So I need to take a break so that I can come back and have that game with you and just be my best self. So I feel yucky, and here's what I'm doing to take care of it. What have we just imparted to our child? An amazing lesson that you can say no when you need to say no. You can say, I got to take care of myself. It's important to take care of myself. And they learn how to do that. They learn to set boundaries. They learn to understand
mm,
themselves a little bit more. And you talk about it. You role model that, and then you can have some conversations with them. And as they get older, you can even be more explicit about how to do that, because that leads into the executive functioning. We're raising our kids to become independent, right? So one of the
mm.
things we have to do is kind of teach them self-care skills. Wouldn't that have been great if we all got that? So this is a thing that I think is important.
Yeah. For me, in the mornings, I've been getting into I started out, I did 1 year. This is my second year of doing workouts. which is huge because when I started, I had no endurance. I was at zero. But I'm up to doing 2 to 3 mile workouts now.
Wow, that's great.
I do them and because I know when I come back, my routine, the flow of my day is, at least on weekdays, work out, come home, breakfast, then it's work time, then lunch, housework, and then get my daughter home from school, homework, all the things, and then dinner, whatever
Yeah,
else is going on. And obviously, I'm constantly always just listening out for if my husband needs me
yeah,
with his health. And so knowing that exercise is a way to keep me in shape so I can physically do the tasks that I need to do throughout the day and also help prevent my immune system from crashing. I make it a point
yeah,
that I do that while my daughter's eating breakfast. I take that half hour to work out. So that
yeah,
way
that's
it's
great.
done and I do
Yeah.
it first thing. I get her up, get her started on her routine,
Mm-hmm.
pack her lunch, get my husband going for the day, get him some coffee. Once that's done, I am in my workout clothes and I work out for half an hour
Yeah,
before we
that's
take her to
great.
school.
That's great.
So that's another thing when you're thinking about your self-care, what is the best time of day that's going to make it a no-brainer for you to be able to be
Mm-hmm.
consistent with it? Is it late at night after the kids go to sleep? Is it in the
Mm-hmm.
afternoon when they're home from school?
Mm-hmm.
Is it if you have a baby? Is it when they do nap and
Mm-hmm.
that's your chance to do it? Maybe maybe you have to break it down and do it maybe a little bit three times throughout the day to get it in. I don't
Yeah.
care, and especially if you're just starting out, whether it's exercise or eating or hydration, just start and build. Now, Rome wasn't built in a day, so we're not
Right.
expecting you to
Right.
go from 0 to 60 because going from 0 to 60 right out the gate is not good for you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
think about what you can do, and work up to it. For the first year, when I was working up to trying to do my mile workouts, I started out by doing walks outside, and then when I found a good walking aerobic program, DVD wise, I found it first on YouTube for free, and then I
Yeah.
said, no, I want to invest again, going with the being willing to invest a little bit in myself. My husband
Mm-hmm.
surprised me for Valentine's Day and bought me some more, or not some more, but actually bought me the DVDs so I didn't have to deal with the free
Yeah.
ads and I
Yeah.
can just circulate through the videos. And and now I
Yeah.
have a regime that I do. So but it took time. So definitely think about that.
Yeah.
How can
Yeah.
you put some money on yourself
Yeah.
or even how can you just get started today
Yeah.
without
Yeah. Yeah.
any fancy equipment or anything? All I do is all I have, the only equipment I use is just my DVD player and my TV. That's it.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't have to be like hiring a personal chef or a personal coach or a personal
No.
whatever, physical coach or whatever. But I think it's important too to realize that as caregivers, even as parents, we sometimes are always hyper vigilant on these other people that we're taking care of. And hypervigilance is itself a form of trauma. It's like we are traumatizing ourselves a little bit when we do this. It's not a bad thing. We do need to be vigilant and watch. We just have to allow ourselves also to, again, I keep going back to check in with yourself too, because start to notice what's happening to you and your body. You are just as important to pay attention to and to be vigilant about. And make room in your day to do a little self-reflection and think about some things. Sometimes when you're walking, that's a great time to be thinking of things and just
Absolutely.
you could be listening to a podcast. You could also just walk and not listen to anything and just be in your thoughts. And that's not a
Mhm.
waste of time. It's actually really nourishing. I mean, I'm one of those people that loves to listen to music and a podcast when I'm walking, so, or an audiobook. So I'm like, I'm not preaching what I always do, but I'm learning to do that more because I think that silent time in our head, it can be really helpful at times. I've also been a big fan of journaling. So I journal to be
Mhm.
able to let it out. Sometimes it might be I'm just rather than going and yelling at somebody, I'm going to write it out and I'm going to throw it away. But once I get it out of my head, it doesn't have to come out of my mouth.
Yes, that's a
It
good
doesn't have
point,
to go to
especially with
anybody
littles
else.
where you don't wanna blow your
Yes.
stack in front of your children.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, but yeah, and checking in with yourself, you know, it's okay to ask for help. There's no shame in that. And
Yes.
sometimes help isn't necessarily hiring someone. I mean, as a business owner and a caregiver and business coach, obviously I've invested in coaching
For
and I have
sure.
some amazing mentors that are helping me that I love. But at the same time, it's that balance of asking for help and wanting to gain
Yeah.
skills that I need to by practicing and just
Yeah.
doing it and figuring things out. Because you have to, going back to that brain bit, we're all unique. No two brains. Like with my, for example, like with my, it's interesting, even with healthcare, my husband has epilepsy. And the
Hmm.
interesting thing about epilepsy is that usually it's caught as a child, but it
Yeah.
can be adult onset. But the interesting about it is that even like the way our doctor was describing it to us is that even if he had had it as a kid, and even if we had found out, oh, grandma or grandpa had it, or an aunt or a sister or someone had it, the treatment, he said, is still going to be different because you're dealing, even though there's some genetics that are similar,
Hmm.
you each have, you and your other family member have a distinct unique brain, so your
Absolutely.
reaction, your body's chemical reaction to the treatments that we give you are going to be vastly different to even a loved one that has the same
Right.
diagnosis, but their titration for meds and their protocols are going to be so different
Right.
because
Right.
it's yeah. And with your system, the same thing is for you. The with self-care, like we talked about today, self-care, caregiving,
Hmm.
business, personal, whatever,
Yeah.
it has to begin with you and what
Yeah.
works for your brain. And it's okay to try things to figure out what works for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I definitely leverage a lot of digital in terms of my calendar. Again, I don't like solely just go off of a paper calendar like I used to, but I'm also have figured out over the years, ever since I was little, I need multiple reminders. So we do have a family paper calendar in our living room
Yeah.
so we can eyeball what's coming up in the
Hmm.
schedule. But
Hmm.
then I have it written down in my Google Calendar, and I have an alert to go out one day before, so that way every day I'll get an alert about what's coming next up in the schedule. Now, for
Yeah.
me, that's enough. Or some people that might, oh, that's too much. I can just write it down in one place and I get it. That's fine. But again, everyone's different. Maybe some
Know
people need,
yourself. Yeah.
yeah, maybe some people need multiple reminders, like what you're talking about. Maybe you need an alert to go out a day before, maybe an hour before, and then maybe one more 15 minutes before. That's
Yeah.
fine. If that's what helps you stay on track and feel less stressed and more in control and less overwhelmed, please do it.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what we want you to do. Again, there's no right or wrong way, and you can change. Like when I started, I was solely a paper girl. It's like, no, technology, no, I'm not doing. But over the years, I do very
Yeah.
much a blend with my system
It's great.
of leveraging some paper tools, but
Yeah.
a lot more digital than what I used to, and I find it helps. And the big thing I will say too, one more thing about digital and paper, the way you can blend it is think about tools that can are accessible both on your phone and your desktop, and then also that have printing access. Because again, if you're with technology can crash. So worst case scenario, then you can't access it. So if you do write, say, a medical history documentation or a list of medications or triggers or symptoms or allergies in, say, Google Docs, print off a copy
Yeah.
and keep it on hand. You can keep that with you, like in your you can keep that with you, like in your purse or in a designated place in your office where you know where to find it, or your home, kitchen counter, table, or countertop, or a desk, or a drawer, whatever you want. So you can always have access to a copy, like if you need to show it to the EMTs, if you have to call 911, or just reference some information when you're at a medical appointment. But then
Yeah.
because you have it digitally, you can,
Yeah.
and this is what I love Google Docs, is you can go in either on your phone or your
Yep.
desktop, add in changes, and it will show up, reflect both
Yeah.
on your desktop or your phone. And then you
Yeah.
can always again go back and print off another, because I remember my mom did this a lot. Every time they had medical appointments, lots of times, 9 times out of 10, between the previous one and the one she was getting for pep for, same thing with daddy, is that there was a med change. Maybe
Yep.
they stopped a medicine or they started a new one. They would go in there, take 10 to 15 minutes, edit the sheet, print it out, put it in their folder that they kept. That's what they
Yeah.
did. They always had a designated folder that they would take with them to a medical appointment, so that way they had the most accurate information
Right.
when they went to an appointment. And
Right.
so it really is up to you. The sky's the limit. You just have to
Yeah.
try things and figure out what works, and then tweak as you go. I know
Yeah.
we've thrown a lot of information at you, but we just want you just starting to get
Yeah.
the juices flowing. Try some stuff, see if it
Right.
works.
Right.
And if
Right.
it doesn't
Right.
work, that's fine. But
That's
when
fine
I
too.
say
Right.
give it
Yeah.
some time, more than 24 hours. Give it a
Yes.
week, give it a month, give it
Right.
90 days, because you have to establish the habit. I like to, my rule of thumb is at least 90 days. Give it
Yeah.
3 months to really see
Yeah.
if what you're doing is working. If it's not, then tweak. But you got to give it some time because you
Right.
have to establish the habit.
And you're right. And notice where you're falling off, right? When you start noticing that, it's like, oh, okay, when these things start happening, it falls off. Oh, when these things, okay, what are some things I can change? And I do think, too, I know in our next conversation, we'll talk more about some of those things we might need for on the go or whatever. But where technology can also help us is, again, as I said, we've always got our phone with us. It's rare that we don't. And, you might have to, you get called to an emergency room and the doctors aren't going to talk to you. If you're the healthcare proxy, you need to have that paperwork. They need to see that. But there are some digital programs that are really pretty safe that you could have that there and you on your phone and you can just from your phone, email it to them, and then they have
Mhm.
it, and they will print it out and put it in the because they need that. And yeah, so there's lots of little tricks and stuff like that. I think really, I guess so much that I want to when I started doing this was just to share with people. One, acknowledging where you are. It's really important to acknowledge things have changed when you start taking on things change when you become a parent. Your life changes irrevocably. Listen, even if you adopt a pet, your life changes. You know what I mean? You get a cat or a dog, you got to show up for that animal. Well, then you get a child, it's a whole nother ball of wax. But then you add in this other piece, your life is changing. So you have to sort of take stock and acknowledge this is where I am. And then what do I need? And I am a big believer in support groups. There are a lot of
Yes.
free ones. So if anybody out there is working with is caring for anybody with any kind of dementia, contact your local Alzheimer's association. Your parent may not have Alzheimer's, but Alzheimer's associations run a lot of free groups. And some of them are online. And so you can just it's so even if the person and the people in the group don't have the exact same diagnosis, it's not about the diagnosis. It's about
Mhm.
you. It's about
Yes.
you and how you're responding to these new things you have to do and how the all these feelings that you're having. So find a support group, and there's plenty for other caregivers, lots of different things. If you're dealing with somebody with cancer, there are a lot of find the cancer society in your state or your area, and there will be support groups. But faith-based support groups, if that's something that you're connected to, they will have oftentimes some grief support or caregiving support. The thing about hearing from other people is it opens up your mind sometimes to another way of
Mhm.
doing something, but it's also being in a group of people who just hear you and they
And
understand
validate you.
and validate you. Because I can't tell you how often I hear from people, well, I can't talk to my friends because they just don't want to hear this stuff. I'm like, I get that. That happens, right? Some people are just not going to be able to hear that. It's hard for them to hear that you're upset or whatever. Um, in addition to a support group, if you can find one person that you can just call when you need to, and you call them and you say, I don't want any advice. I don't want you to tell me what to do. I just need 10 minutes to vent and tell you and say something out loud to people who aren't going to judge me. Can you do this? I
Yeah.
can't tell you how wonderful that is. Just venting, but be clear. I don't want your advice. It's not unless you do. I mean, if you do,
Mhm.
ask for it. But a lot of times
Yeah.
it's just, can I just call and say, I feel crazy right now. I feel angry. I feel sad. These are the things I'm feeling. And I can't tell you what a relief it is sometimes to just let that go
Yeah.
and be
And maybe it's
heard.
not yeah, and maybe it's not necessarily advice or a mean to vent. I know of one thing I did with my mother for the first couple of years my husband was sick before she passed away. Was she was so sick. So she obviously couldn't do any like the physical things of coming over and playing with Linda or my daughter or
Hmm.
anything like that. You know what I mean? It was hard. And so but the one thing she could do is listen. So there were
Yeah.
many times I was calling on the phone and she would just let me vent.
Yeah.
And then now with her being gone, my aunt, who has become who's always been my second mom, because her kids and my kids, her kids and I are the
Same
same
age.
age.
Yeah,
We grew
yeah,
up together and we're cousins, but we say we're siblings because we grew
yeah,
up and they've been they were my wedding party when I got married, and they're not cousins to my daughter. They're not second cousins. They're aunties and uncle to
yeah,
my little
yeah,
girl, and we love it, and my daughter adores them. And so anyway, so with my bonus mom, as it were, there's many times I've called and said, "Listen, I don't need any advice or anything. Will you just pray for me? I just want,
yeah,
I just share what I'm feeling and what's going on." I said, "I know you can't do anything, but she has told me so many times that I'll pray for you. I'm here.
yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah,
one thing I can do."
yeah.
And that has been something that's helped for me too.
Right,
So,
right.
and maybe, going back to that bit of like maybe family and maybe friends don't get it, but other people will get it. And maybe even if it isn't like necessarily advice, but maybe sometimes
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
just
It
talking to
is.
someone, whether it's the leader of your faith. I've done this a couple times.
Yeah,
We're in a church where we have multiple pastors on our team at church, and there's times I've just dropped in, and whatever one's available, I've just had a
yeah.
moment to talk and cry
It's
and be prayed
beautiful.
with, and that has
It's
helped. So
beautiful.
do that. Um, Another thing I don't think that gets talked about enough is that counseling is helpful.
So helpful.
I know it's tough to think about talking about private things to a stranger, but here's the thing. My mother was a licensed family and marriage counselor. And here's the amazing thing is that even though it might feel weird talking to someone that's a stranger, they're trained. They're trained to deal with trauma, and even just getting your foot in the door with a counselor can be amazing because sometimes maybe you do need other resources, not because
Exactly.
you're doing anything wrong, but just, just like with any skill set, any
Yeah.
coach, any industry, there's certain resources. Once you get your foot in the door with one, it makes it faster to fast track you to get you into other resources, and connections and get you the other support that you need,
Yeah.
right? And so I don't want you to miss out on that. So if family, friends, if you're not per se a religious person and that's not an appropriate step for you, definitely look in your community to
Yeah.
find a counselor or therapist, because
Yeah.
again, it's not about necessarily always going on medication. That's only in
Yeah. Yeah.
cases that needs it. But again, just having a safe place, because like HIPAA, just with anything, they can't share information about their clientele with anyone else. So what you say, if it's to vent, cuss, swear, do whatever you need to, that's personally
Right.
not me, but whatever you need. And then
Right. Yeah.
again, because you've leveraged that resource in the future, if you do need something else, your foot's at least in the door. So that's going to fast track moving forward.
Absolutely. And I want to say two things. One is, sometimes, like you and I have been talking, and it's clear that you really loved your parents, and I really loved my parents too. But there are a lot of caregivers out there, some who may be listening, who didn't have great relationships with their parent, and
Yep,
now they're caring for them. That's a really tricky situation to be maybe
absolutely.
financially on the hook for your parent, a parent that
Mm,
you felt abandoned you or neglected you or harmed you in some way, and you're still
yes,
showing up for them. That's amazing. But this stuff, sometimes caring for somebody, it brings up family stuff, it brings up sibling stuff. And so therapy is a great way. So what I want, so that's one thing, is just realize that it's okay if you're feeling uh, having a lot of feelings around this. That's going to be normal. The other thing is counseling is really awesome. I can't, of course, I'm a psychologist. I really believe in counseling, but have taken part in it many times. I love it. Still working with a therapist, love her. I'm doing some great stuff. I'm like, hey, I started back. I'm like, okay, I'm through a lot of stuff, but you know what? I want to live a really great end of my life, and I have some things I want to let go of and think about. So this is a great place to tease it out and work with it, right? So
hmm
so anyway, so therapy, really counseling is oftentimes looking at there's oftentimes when you look backwards and you look at stuff and you're trying to make sense of it and put it in perspective and maybe change some things. On the other hand, there's also coaching, and coaching isn't the same as counseling, although some coaches sometimes lean into that, but they may have counseling language that they use, but really coaches are going to be future focused. And so there are caregiver coaches that can be very helpful too because they you can talk about old stuff, But if it's too deep for them, they're going to suggest you go to, because that's not what a coach is doing. A coach is not untangling all the old stuff or any pathology, right?
Right.
Um, but they're going to help you think about, okay, what's stopping you right now to make some shifts so that you can, because here's where you want to go, and this gets in your way. So let's think about what are some things you could do to change those mind shifts or those patterns of behavior. So I just wanted to clarify coaching and counseling are so important and can be so helpful. And I think the stigma is starting to lessen, but it is hard for some people to take
Hmm.
advantage of that. But
Hmm.
I agree with you. I think it's really important.
Yeah, yeah. And again, it's not about having the perfect system because there is no
Yeah.
perfect system
No.
and there's no wrong or right way. It's about figuring out the way that works for you.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And I hope
100%.
as you've been listening to this episode of the Caregiving and Entrepreneurship Reimagined podcast, that you're walking away with some hope, some encouragement, and just, maybe that first simple shift of knowing where you want to go and realizing that there's a way through. So, Christy, I have so enjoyed having you on the podcast today, and I cannot wait for part two. Guys, again, make sure you're like, follow, and subscribe to the podcast. Share this episode with your family, your friends, coworkers, whoever else might
Yeah.
be another caregiver who might be needing this, because this two-part episode series is going to be so helpful, I know, for so many people. So, but in the meantime, where can we find more Christy Bates or yeah, Yates? Sorry, excuse
No,
me.
no, no worries. You can find me at my website is christyyates.com. So Christy is spelled a million different ways. I happen to spell it Christy, last name Yates. So Christy, Christy, Yates.com. And on my website, you can find links to a lot of different things that I've done and do, some of my media. But also, if you go to the resources section, I have a lot of resources that are for free. You just, sign up for them and can just good talking points you can share with people. I just started a new program where I'm doing conversations with some other professionals, and it's called Conversations We Need to Have. And so if you're on LinkedIn, you can find that there. We're doing LinkedIn Lives. But you can follow. You can also on my website find all my socials, and that'll be an Instagram Live too. But that's where you can find me. And then my book is available wherever you buy online books. So if you're an Amazon person, it's on Amazon. It's called Building a Legacy of Love, Thriving in the
Aw.
Sandwich Generation. But it's also available, at Barnes and Noble online, Thrift Books online, wherever you buy online books.
Awesome. All right. And as always, wherever you're watching this, whether it's on my blog, Spotify, Apple, YouTube, all the information of how to connect with Christy and her amazing resources will be linked below. Also, if you have listened to this and you're a new caregiver, or maybe you've been caregiver for more than 6 months, 2 years, whatever, but you're feeling stuck on just understanding your role as a caregiver, and how medical professionals rely on you. I have a brand new email course. It's called the Caregiver Manual Mini Course, and it's delivered via email. And I will leave the link below of how you can get this free 7 lesson email course. It will just be sent. I can't talk, y'all. Sent to your inbox. And also included in this series are also some special free PDF resource cheat sheets for like logging medications, medical history, um, progress notes. There's a lesson in there where I do teach you a little bit more about how to actually just write progress notes to get you in the framework of observe and document. So you're off to the races with that. So again, all the information for that will be linked below. And again, I just really appreciate each and every one of you taking time to listen to this episode of the Caregiving and Entrepreneurship Reimagined podcast. And Christy and I will see you next week for part two of our series. All right. Thank you, Christy, for joining us today, and take care,
Thanks
everybody.
so much.